Our own planet is still a mystery to all of us. We may think we have already explored every corner of the Earth, but the truth is that humanity is far from achieving this feat. Most of our home has never been explored, not even mapped. And the reason for all this uncertainty lies under the water. Although humans have already set foot on practically every point of land on the planet, most of it is submerged. More than 70% of the Earth's surface is made up of oceans, and most of them remain unexplored to this day. As a result, even life under the water is full of doubts for all of us. Scientists believe that there are more than 2 million different species living in the sea, and more than 90% of them have not even been described by science yet. Yes, we live surrounded by a sea of uncertainty, isolated in the midst of the unknown and drowning in our own ignorance about the world around us. Have you ever stopped to think that when you go into the ocean like on a beach, you don't know what's under the water? William Shakespeare said that there are more mysteries between heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy, but, my friend, you can be sure that beneath the surface there are even more secrets. And that's because the oceans are much deeper than we can imagine. They are true abysses, and many of them scare us just trying to imagine them. This fear even has a name: thalassophobia. How deep is the ocean? Time to dive. How deep is the ocean? Let's suppose you want to see the underwater world with your own eyes. When you enter the ocean, walking at a depth of 2 meters, it's enough that you can't touch the ground with your feet. So, you need to start diving. For the first 10 meters, you can do it without equipment, but soon you'll need an oxygen tank. Even so, you can't go very deep. According to the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, for safety reasons, the maximum depth allowed for recreational diving is 40 meters. But since you are safe in your home, this is just a simulation. Let's continue descending. At this depth, the statue of Christ the Redeemer would already be completely submerged. At 90 meters, it is a Statue of Liberty that is completely underwater. Up to 200 meters, sunlight usually reaches you without much difficulty, but from there, you gradually begin to be enveloped by darkness. Even so, there have been people who have swum deeper than this. The world record for diving is just over 330 meters, which is approximately the size of the Eiffel Tower, but underwater. Going down a little further, the 500-meter range is the one that a military submarine usually operates. And I can tell you that we didn't even go 10% of the way down. We then reach 1,000 meters. The light continues to diminish until the last ray of light is left behind, and there comes a point where there is absolutely nothing left for you to see. 1 kilometer below the surface, there is only darkness. Even with your eyes wide open, everything around you is black. The depth at this point is already greater than the tallest building built by man, and even so, we have not even reached 10% of the depth that awaits us from here down. We have entered the so-called deep ocean. That is why this region, from 1,000 meters onwards, is known as the bathypelagic zone, which comes from the word bathys, which means deep in Greek. In this zone, it is a good thing that you cannot see anything, because it is precisely here that some really horrible animals begin to appear, including the blobfish, which is considered the ugliest animal in the world. And there are also giant animals, such as the colossal squid, which can exceed 14 meters in length. In addition to being in the dark, you are freezing to death. The temperature in this area is around 4 degrees Celsius, although this is the least of your problems, because you would actually already be dead with the pressure of over 5,000 psi, which is the equivalent of the weight of a pickup truck on every inch of your body. In fact, pressure is the biggest obstacle to underwater exploration. And in this region specifically, it is such a big problem that it was here that the tragedy of the Titan submersible occurred. This was the submersible that was trying to see the wreckage of the Titanic, which, by the way, is at a depth of around 3,800 meters. At 4,000 meters, we reach the abyssal zone. This is the region of bizarre animals, such as the famous Melanocytus johnsoni. You may not associate the name with the fish, but it even made an appearance in Finding Nemo. It's the lampfish that appears in the film, a species that has developed bioluminescence to attract its prey in the dark. Finally, we come to the hadopelagic zone. The name comes from Hades, the Greek god of the underworld and the dead. That's a good clue of what the vibe is like down here. This part represents the entire lower half of the ocean, which goes from 6,000 meters to the deepest point on Earth, the Mariana Trench, which is in the Pacific Ocean, about 11,000 meters below the surface. This is more than the altitude of Mount Everest, which is almost 8,848 meters. In other words, the Earth is deeper than it is high. Obviously, the Mariana Trench is extremely difficult to reach, but humans have managed to get there a few times. The conquest of the seabed. The story of this conquest begins a few thousand years ago, with Archimedes' studies on buoyancy, which is the force that pulls bodies immersed in a liquid upwards. Researchers who had always dreamed of exploring the world underwater used these studies as a basis to develop some way of creating a machine capable of taking us to the underwater world and bringing us back to the surface safely. This is very important. Even Leonardo da Vinci proposed a prototype of the first submarines, but they only began to take shape a century later, in the 1600s. The inventor Cornelius Drebbel created a closed rowboat, connected to the surface by an air pipe, and this is considered the first submarine in history. In the following centuries, more modern versions were developed, with compressed air engines, diesel combustion, and even nuclear energy. These technologies allowed changes in military strategies in wars, with new possibilities for espionage and attacks on enemies. For this reason, several nations began to invest in the development of submarines in a race that even resembles the space race during the Cold War. And just as the Cold War ended up boosting space exploration, this submarine race intensified the exploration of the oceans. More and more new inventions were capable of reaching even deeper points. In the 1930s, Americans William Beebe and Otis Barton were the first to reach a depth of 900 meters. They used a bathysphere, a tiny iron ball that can be claustrophobic just looking at it. This record was surpassed in other dives in the following decades, when important names in oceanography made great advances in science and even in cinema. This was the case of the French documentary filmmaker Jacques Cousteau, who developed the aqualung in the 1940s, a piece of equipment with air cylinders to make filming in the water easier. But it was on January 23rd, 1960 that history was finally written. The Swiss explorer Jacques Picard and the American Don Walsh boarded the submersible Trieste. They descended for exactly 5 hours towards the Mariana Trench and became the first human beings ever to reach the deepest point on planet Earth. This happened almost a decade before the first man landed on the moon. And as with the space Conquest, it was a feat that was repeated only a few times after that. In fact, the next person to descend into the Mariana Trench only did so more than 50 years later, in 2012. And it was none other than James Cameron, the director of Titanic. Not the ship, but the movie. He is passionate about the underwater world. This means that for a long time in our history, more human beings had set foot on the moon than had reached the bottom of our planet's oceans. After all, 12 people have been to the moon. It was only a few years ago that the team of underwater explorers turned the tables on the team of astronauts, and this was only possible thanks to the creation of the limiting factor, an ultra-modern underwater vehicle that has already made about 27 trips to the bottom of the ocean. With this, today, 27 people have reached the depths of almost 11,000 meters of the Earth. But how exactly do we know this measurement not only of the Mariana Trench, but of all the other deep points of the ocean? After all, if it is such an unexplored region, who can guarantee that there is not an even deeper point? Well, mapping the seabed is a huge challenge. In fact, even the maps of Mars are better than the cartography of our own planet, at least when the reliefs under the water are taken into account. The maps of Mars have a resolution of 6 meters per pixel. In the case of the oceans, each pixel encompasses about 1.5 kilometers. That is, the level of definition is much lower. One of the reasons is that satellites cannot photograph the seabed. Even so, photos from a distance can help in an unusual way. You may not know it, but the sea is not exactly straight and smooth. There are small variations, with parts a little more elevated and others a bit lower. And this, please note, is a reflection of the shape of the ground, thousands of kilometers below. In other words, if there is a small mountain on the ocean floor, the water in that region will be a little higher than in the surrounding area. This allows scientists to discover more or less what the shape of the seabed is like, even without going into the water. The thing is, this method is not very accurate, as there are many irregularities in the underwater floor, just like on land. So for a more detailed measurement, we resort to other techniques, such as the use of sonar. Someone on a boat sends a signal to the seabed and measures how long it takes for the signal to return. Based on this, a calculation is made to discover the exact distance to that point. However, doing this to map an entire sea would be a process that would take decades. That's why a task force called Seabed 2030 was created, an initiative that brings together vessels from different parts of the world, with the goal of mapping the entire underwater floor by 2030, and with much greater precision than current maps. Remember those 1.5 kilometers per pixel. The idea is to reach 800 meters per pixel in the most remote regions and up to 3 meters in the busiest areas. The mission is difficult, but the project is progressing well. When it began in 2017, only 6% of the seabed had been mapped. And today, that number has already exceeded 25%. Some fear that detailed mapping could cause problems for the environment, as it would facilitate the extraction of natural resources far beyond oil. Deep-sea mining could lead to the exploration of sediments such as manganese, iron, and other metals, in addition to polymetallic nodules, which can be used in the manufacture of batteries, solar panels, and even in the defense industry. In fact, Humans have the ability to wreak havoc on everything they touch. It is no wonder that plastic bags have even been found in the Mariana Trench. Even so, we cannot fear information. Choosing to remain ignorant out of fear of progress is going against science and the exploratory spirit of human beings. A detailed study of what lies beneath the seabed can offer many benefits to all of us. Mapping can facilitate, for example, the search for ship and plane wreckage, the installation of internet cables, the understanding of ocean currents, projections of sea level rise, and even tsunami predictions. In other words, mapping the seabed can save lives and also provide humanity with an exciting sense of discovery, the same impetus that led our ancestors to explore the oceans or conquer space, and which is now happening for the last time on our planet. After all, the seabed is the final frontier for humanity on Earth. It is the only part of the world that is still truly unknown, a mysterious place full of secrets that are slowly being revealed right before our eyes. And that is fascinating. Thank you very much, and see you next time.